Good evening to you all, and thank you for coming out in such turbulent weather. This evening we have a subject, an interesting subject I believe, and one that I think can change the way we look at the Bible. As we look at to see whether Bible prophecy is reliable or not, we establish whether we can understand and believe the rest of the Bible as well. This is a subject which can be a pivotal point in our beliefs in the Bible, and a subject that can change the way we think about how we read the Bible in future. So let's start by clarifying just a few things before we go into too much detail, just to ensure that we understand what we actually mean when we talk about this subject. Firstly, what is prophecy? It's a word that I have to admit we don't use very much, is it? Not one in everyday language. And there are a couple of meanings for the word prophecy. One alternative is speaking for another. But for our subject this evening, we'll consider just one application of this word, and it is the prediction of the future made under divine inspiration. Now, there are a number of things in this world where people attempt to try and tell the future. Take the weather, for example. With all the processing power now that we have in this world, the supercomputers, million upon million of calculations are processed, analysing and comparing past events. Using pattern matching and probabilities, we finally get a nice picture in our papers, on our TV and perhaps even on our phones these days. We can then see what we think or the weather may be like in the next 24 to 48 hours and beyond. Now we know this isn't always correct, is it? Particularly in this country. And we can perhaps call this, at best, an educated guess. As the weather prediction extends further and further into the future, it becomes less and less accurate, doesn't it? And it's less and less likely to actually happen. Then there are the financial predictions in this world. There's a great deal of work done, isn't there, about trying to understand how the financial changes happen in the world, with the rise and the fall of the stock exchange, the shift of the world's financial powers. People are dedicated to working out the probability of exactly what is going to happen and try and make some money out of those changes. And again, at best, this is an educated guess. Even in my line of business, in insurance software, most, if not all of our clients have teams of people dedicated to modelling catastrophic events to make sure that the worst case scenario doesn't completely collapse the company, whilst they're still making sure that they make a profit in all that they do. They model earthquake predictions and hurricanes around the world. Then there are those who state the date that the world is coming to an end. There was a man who you may remember in America a few years ago in 2000, before 2011, a Mr. Harold Camping. He spent a considerable amount of time and money advertising the date that the world is going to come to an end on May the 21st, 2011. And this wasn't his first prediction that he made in his life. He made a similar prediction in 1994, and again that came and went. And there are numerous people throughout the ages who have tried to work out the day that the world is going to end, or when Jesus is going to return. But as we're all here this evening, we conclude that they are all wrong. Again, although I'm sure that they tried to work out the date with some information, we can conclude that this, once again, was a guess. And at this point we can look to the Bible for an answer to those people who try and work out the date that Christ is coming back. In Mark 13 we read, "But concerning the day or that hour no one knows, no, not even the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father. Be on guard, keep awake, for you know not when the time will come." So if God tells us that not even the angels know the date when Jesus is going to return, then personally I struggle to work out how some people on this earth think they have worked it out. So once again here we can see that our ability to predict the future is non-existent. God knows exactly this, which brings us nicely to our next question. Why do we have Bible prophecy? So there are a few reasons I'd like to highlight, and although we come back to this question later on, we'll have a look at a few reasons now. Firstly, it's so we can believe in the Bible and the words that are in it. We're told in Timothy that all scripture is breathed out by God and profitable for teaching, for reproof, for correction, and for training in righteousness. So God tells us that scripture is given to us. But he knows that it's really hard for us to take for granted, and that we as humans, we need a little help in believing, some proof for our doubting minds. So God has given us some prophecies, that some have been fulfilled and some are yet to be fulfilled, so that people throughout the ages have been given different prophecies to look for and to believe in. So God has given prophecy to us within the Bible, so that we're not only able to believe the prophecies, but also that we can believe in the rest of the words as well. He has given us prophecies so that we can believe that God wrote the Bible, just as that verse in Timothy tells us. In Isaiah, God speaks to the idols or the false gods, that there are those people who are worshipping. That the people who are worshipping, he challenges these idols to a test, and those people. He says in Isaiah 41, "Let them bring them, and tell us what is to happen. Tell us the former things, what they are, that we may consider them, that we may know their outcome, or declare to us the things to come. Tell us what is to come hereafter, that we may know that you are gods, do good or do harm, that we may be dismayed and terrified." So God challenges these people who believe in idols. He challenges the idols themselves, those gods that people bow down to. He challenges them to speak about the things that have happened in the past. He challenges them to speak about the things that are yet to come, knowing full well that they can't. So God shows us here that he uses prophecy to prove that he is the God, the only God. And he has an ability that clearly sets out that he proves that he is the only true God, and one that sets him apart from all other gods that people believe in. And we'll come back to this area later on. But our title isn't just about prophecy and what it is. The title is also about the reliability, isn't it, of Bible prophecy itself. So while we go through a number of examples, we'll be building up a case of whether we can believe Bible prophecy and see whether it's reliable. And to build up this case, we have to understand how we assess something is reliable. We need proof. And for this, God has already given us a basis for this proof. He's already given us a method for understanding whether we should believe something or not. God told the people in Israel how to know whether to believe someone claiming to be prophesying in the name of God or not. We can deduce then that there are people during the times of the prophets and within the New Testament that there were people claiming that they were prophesying, and perhaps, in no doubt, trying to make some money out of it and to create a following of them. So God knew this, and he gave them, the people, a way of testing the prophets, a way of seeing if they were reliable or not, a way of seeing whether the prophecies were coming from God or not. And perhaps this is a good place for us to start as we consider our title today. Come with me, please, to Deuteronomy chapter 18. Deuteronomy chapter 18 and verse 17. And the Lord said to me, "They are right in what they have spoken. I will raise up them a prophet, like you, from among their brothers, and I will put my words in his mouth, and he shall speak to them all that I command him. And whatever will not listen to my words, he that shall speak in my name, I myself will require it of him. But the prophet who presumes to speak a word in my name, that I have not commanded him to speak, or speaks in the name of other gods, that same prophet shall die. And if you say in your heart, how may we know that the word of the Lord has not spoken? When a prophet speaks in the name of the Lord, if the word does not come to pass or come true, this is a word that the Lord hath not spoken. The prophet has spoken it presumptuously. You need not be afraid of him." So God clearly tells the people in Israel that if a prophet tells them something that comes to pass in God's name, and it doesn't come to pass, then they should not listen to that person. Or worse still, if a false prophet tells people to listen to other gods beside that one true God, then he or she will die. So the prophets that we can read about in the Bible would have been tested by the people. And there is only one way for this test to be valid, or for them to pass that test: if the prophecy is fulfilled in the lifetime of the person who is testing it. So just as we are here tonight testing whether Bible prophecy is reliable or not, the people in a prophet's time would also have been tested. But it doesn't end there. In order then to believe the prophet, there must therefore be a short-term prophecy, something which would come to pass in that person's lifetime. And then, being believed, the prophet would then prophesy something that would happen further into the future, so that those listeners would understand what would happen, and that they could verify that things that this man would say was going to come to pass. So a prophet would prophesy something that they could be validated against, something that would happen in the short term, and then perhaps something in the longer term that would then be passed down throughout the ages, that they would have already have passed that test. And within these prophecies, there would have been varying timelines for those people throughout the eras that happened after them. So let's have a look at one of these prophecies, which are a short-term prophecy, something which came to pass in the day of the prophet who spake it. And tonight we're going to take a look at Daniel as our subject and our main case study for this evening. So as we stated earlier, we should build up the case of whether the reliability of Bible prophecy can be trusted. And as we've seen, we'll start with a short-term prophecy, fulfilling God's test for whether we should listen to that prophet. In our introductory reading, we read about a man called Daniel, telling the king of Babylon about his dream. So let's have a look at this chapter and see if we can fulfill God's test of fulfilling a short-term prophecy. It would seem that Nebuchadnezzar had a number of dreams in his life. He was inquisitive into what these dreams actually meant. He had quite a number of knowledgeable men around him, and it would appear that they tried to please the king by telling him most probably exactly what he wanted. But there was this one morning when the king wouldn't tell them what they needed to know, a starting point for their ideas. Without the details of the dream itself, how could they please the king? How could they guess his dream? I'm sure we've all had odd dreams in our sleep. They could literally be about anything. So how could someone firstly know what the dream was? And secondly, know what the interpretation thereof was of it? In verse 19 of Daniel chapter 2, we see that God revealed a mystery to Daniel. So come with me, please, if you're not already there, to Daniel chapter 2. So verse 19. Then a mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. And then we read about the image of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, didn't we? The passage which we have already read in our reading. He dreamt of an image with a head of gold, chest and arms of silver, belly and thighs of brass, and legs of iron, and feet of iron and clay. He saw this image, and then he saw a stone being carved from a mountain, smiting the feet and the clay, and breaking the whole image to the ground. This stone then grew to cover the whole earth. And the different parts of the body of that image that we've just described were prophesied to be different empires taking over Israel. Now, as Daniel was told this prophecy to the king of Babylon, we know that this prophecy was given over 2,500 years ago. Since then, there have been the exact number of empires ruling over Israel. The head of gold representing Babylon, then the Medes and the Persians as the silver, the Greek empire as the brass, and the Roman Empire as the legs of iron, and the feet as mixed nations, some strong and some weak. But we must remember that we're building a case for the reliability of Bible prophecy. So how does this passage help us? We need to find some proof, don't we? Some proof that within a short amount of time that Daniel's prophecy could come true. So how could those who heard God's test apply God's test against his words to see if they would come true? Well, let's have a quick look at another prophecy which Daniel tells that happened almost instantly. A very short-term prophecy. King Nebuchadnezzar had another troubling dream, and based on past events, I'm amazed that the king still went to his wise men. But when they couldn't tell the king what the interpretation was, he again goes to Daniel to tell him of the real interpretation. This is quite a lengthy chapter, so Well, please read this in your own time. So we'll just have a look at a few of these verses in Daniel chapter 4. And we'll read the interpretation from Daniel. So Daniel chapter 4, and we'll start at verse 19. Then Daniel, whose name was Belshazzar, was dismayed for a while, and his thoughts alarmed him. And the king answered and said, Belshazzar, let not the dream or the interpretation alarm you. Belshazzar answered and said, My lord, may the dream be for those who hate you, and its interpretation for your enemies. The tree you saw which grew and became strong, so that its top reached to heaven, and it was visible to the end of the whole earth, whose trees were beautiful and its fruit abundant, in which was food for all, under the beasts of the field which found shade, and in whose branches the birds of the heavens lived. It is you, O king, who have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reaches to heaven, and your dominion to the ends of the earth. And because the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven, and saying, Chop down the tree and destroy it, but leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, and the tender grass of the field, and let him be wet with the dew of heaven, and let his portion be with the beasts of the field, till 7 periods of time pass over him. This is the interpretation, O king. It is a decree of the Most High, which has come upon my lord the king, that you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and you shall be wet with the dew of heaven, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men, and gives it to whom he will. And then remember, we're looking at the test of whether this short-term prophecy will come to pass. Come down to verse 33. Immediately the word was fulfilled against Nebuchadnezzar. He was driven from among men and ate grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, till his hair grew as long as eagle's feathers, and his nails were like the bird's claws. At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted up my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and praised and honoured him who lives forever. For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. So we're told that immediately this happened, fulfilling our test of a prophet. But you may say perhaps this was only heard by the king and his servants. It's perhaps a more public event, who people may believe in Daniel's prophetic words. Well, now let's revisit the king's dream about the image. We've already established in that telling Nebuchadnezzar the actual dream that it was something which would only come from God. The chances of guessing a random dream for someone is so remote that it's almost impossible, particularly when Daniel didn't particularly know the king very well. But this isn't strictly proof for our subject and our test as a prophet, as describing an event that had already happened. So let's take the first part of this dream. The image that Nebuchadnezzar saw in his dream is essentially the timeline for the kingdoms ruling over Israel, then at the end expanding to the rest of the world at the end. The head of gold, the Babylonian Empire, was already established. So what was the next thing to happen? The subsequent empire would be symbolised as silver, a slightly less powerful, but nonetheless still ruling over the land of Israel. So when did this event take place? We'll come with you please to the next chapter, Daniel chapter 5. As we just read about the downfall from the king of King Nebuchadnezzar, the next king was his son, King Belshazzar, and he decided to have a big party. But during this party he made some key mistakes. So let's have a look at this passage in Daniel chapter 5. King Belshazzar made a great feast for 1,000 of his lords, and drank wine in front of the 1,000. Belshazzar, when he tasted the wine, commanded that the vessels of gold and of silver that Nebuchadnezzar his father had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem be brought, that the king and his lords, his wives and his concubines might drink from them. Then he brought in the golden vessels that he had taken out of the temple, the house of God in Jerusalem. And the king and his lords, his wives and his concubines drank from them. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver and bronze and iron, wood and stone. and immediately the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on a plaster of the wall of the king's palace, opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's colour changed, and his thoughts alarmed him. His limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. If you come down to verse 17. Then Daniel answered and said before the king, "Let your gifts be for yourself, and give your rewards to another. Nevertheless, I will read the writing to the king, and make known to him the interpretation. O king, the most high God gave Nebuchadnezzar your father kingship, and greatness and glory and majesty. And because of the greatness that he gave him, all peoples, nations, and languages trembled and feared before him. Whom he would, he killed, and whom he would, he kept alive. Whom he would, he raised up, and whom he would, he humbled. But when his heart was lifted up, and his spirit was hardened, so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and his glory was taken from him. He was driven from among the children of mankind, and his mind was made like that of a beast, and his dwelling was with the wild donkeys. He was fed grass like an ox, and his body was wet with the dew of heaven, until he knew that the Most High God rules the kingdom of mankind, and set over it whom he will. And you, his son, Belshazzar, have not humbled your heart, though you knew all this. But you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven, and the vessels of his house have been brought in before you, and you, and your lords, and your wives, and your concubines have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver, gold, bronze, iron, wood, and stone, which did not see, or hear, or know. But the God in whose your hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honoured. Then from his presence the hand was sent, and the writing was inscribed. And this was the writing that was inscribed: Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. And this is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, your God has numbered the days of your kingdom, and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed, and in the balances, and found wanting. And Perez, your kingdom is divided, and given to the Medes and Persians. Then Belshazzar gave the command, and Daniel was clothed in purple, and a chain of gold was put around his neck, and a proclamation was made about him that he should be third ruler in the kingdom. And that very night Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed, and Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. And so not only did God give Daniel the knowledge of that dream that Nebuchadnezzar had, and the interpretation of it, the next part of that dream came true in his lifetime, fulfilling the test of a prophet, proof that those around Daniel would be able to believe that he was a true prophet, that he had words that was from the inspiration of God. And what more public place can be proved than in a very large party that was at that time? But what of us now in this time? Can we also believe and understand and accept the reliability of these words? Well, there are a number of archaeological sites that have been investigated. Forgive the pronunciation of these, but Tepe Nush Ijan, which is primarily a religious site of the Median period. Gobi Tepe was a fortified palace of the Median king or tribal chief. And Babajan was also a seat of the lesser tribe of a ruler of Media. And if you do a Google search on the internet for the Medes and the Persian Empire, you will find around 2.5 million results, from maps and timelines, from lists of kings to found artifacts. We can then look to Greece, the next kingdom in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. Again, nothing is disputed about the empire, is it? It was prophesied all those years ago that before they even came onto the scene. And then the Roman Empire. Again, nothing is disputed about them. We even see evidence of the Roman Empire in our country still today, with some towns and ruins all around this country still bearing some of the things that the Roman Empire built. And so with all these empires which Daniel interpreted from that dream, he was at the time of the first kingdom when he was given. Perhaps he got lucky with the Medes and the Persians. Perhaps he knew that they would be next door and they were building a big army. But I'd say even less likely that he would be guessing about the Greek, and even then less about the Roman Empire, as it was so far into the future. How could Daniel had known without being told by the only true God, without being given that foreknowledge from God? Again, showing the reliability of Bible prophecy. But it wasn't just Daniel that we can believe in. Let's have a quick look at some of the other examples that we can see. In the book of Micah, around 700 years before Jesus was born, Micah wrote down a prophecy which foretold the place of birth of Jesus. Again, no one disputes where Jesus was born, and yet we see this fulfillment in a prophecy, an event that had so little chance of happening by chance. It's almost impossible, isn't it, to guess where someone would be born. In Micah chapter 2 and verse 5, we read, "But you, O Bethlehem Ephrathah, who are too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you shall come forth for me one who is to be the ruler in Israel, whose coming forth is from old, from ancient days." And so we know through the celebrations that we see in this country and around the world at Christmas each year, we see that Jesus was indeed born in Bethlehem. And we can read this in Luke chapter 2 and verse 4. "And Joseph also went up from Galilee, from the towns of Nazareth, to Judea, to the city of David, which is called Bethlehem, because he was of the house and lineage of David, to be registered with Mary, his betrothed, who was with child. And while they were there, the time came for her to give birth. And she gave birth to her firstborn son, and wrapped him in swaddling clothes, and laid him in a manger, because there was no place for them at the inn." So once again we can see that 700 years before this event was taking place, we can read it in Scripture. And then we can look to Zechariah. In the 5th century BC, a prophet called Zechariah prophesied that Jesus would be betrayed for the price of a slave. According to the Jewish law, this is 30 pieces of silver. And this money would also be used to buy a burial ground for Jerusalem's poor foreigners. So let's take a look at this prophecy in Zechariah chapter 11 and verse 12. "Then I said to him, If it seems good for you, give me my wages, but if not, keep them, and they weighed out, as my wages, 30 pieces of silver. Then the Lord said to me, Throw it to the potter, the lordly price at which I was priced by them. So I took the 30 pieces of silver and threw them into the house of the Lord, to the potter." And then 5 centuries later on, we read in Matthew chapter 27 and verse 3, "Then when Judas, his betrayer, saw that Jesus was condemned, he changed his mind and brought back the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders, saying, I have sinned by betraying innocent blood. They said, What is that to us? See it to yourself. And throwing down the pieces of silver into the temple, he departed and went and hanged himself. So they took counsel and brought with them the potter's field as a burial place for strangers. Therefore that field has been called a field of blood to this day." Again, more proof of the reliability of the Bible prophecies. The chance of guessing that Jesus would be betrayed, guessing the amount of money that he would be betrayed with, and guessing that with that money it would be thrown back and then used for a potter's field. It's such a slim chance that it's impossible, isn't it? But as we read in Luke chapter 18, "But what is impossible with men, is possible with God." So we've looked at a few reasons at the beginning of our thoughts as to why God has given prophecy to us. And during our considerations this evening, we've looked at some prophecies which prove that they are reliable. But there is another reason that we are given prophecies, and that is to tell us what is going to happen in the future. Let's have a look at the end of Nebuchadnezzar's dream. We looked at the first few kingdoms, the Babylonians, the Medes and Persians, the Greeks and the Romans. And then we come to the feet. A mixture of iron and of clay. A time of strong, a time of weak nations ruling over Israel. A time which doesn't gel together very well. a time of instability, and perhaps a bit of stability. This is our time. The prophecy includes us, something which is a great feeling, isn't it, when we are in the middle of a prophecy. But at this time of this feat, there is one more thing that happened in Nebuchadnezzar's dream. A rock was cut from a mountain. It hit the image, so much so that it destroyed, and the dust was blown away, leaving that stone to fill the whole earth as a mountain. This is a prophecy of Jesus returning to this earth. This is a prophecy of seeing that the kingdom that Jesus will set up will fill the whole earth. This is a prophecy of something which is yet to come. It is a prophecy that the kingdom of God will greatly surpass all of the kingdoms of men. So much so that it will not be remembered. It will be like the dust that has been blown away. If we acknowledge that Daniel's prophecy, all those empires ruling over Israel, if we accept that these happened and accept that this was a true prophecy, and we acknowledge that these empires happened exactly as Daniel prophesied, then surely we should be believing that the remaining words will also come to pass. So this is why God has given us prophecy. Not only that we can believe that he is the only true God, but so that we know what is going to happen in the future from our time onwards. And as we've established earlier, only God can tell us these things. We don't know when Jesus is exactly going to return. As Jesus says himself, that only God knows. But I hope that by looking at the rest of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, we can understand that Bible prophecy is reliable, and that Jesus will return to set up his kingdom here on earth. And so as we come to our end of our thoughts together this evening, we've looked at just a few passages just to show how we can rely on the Bible prophecies. Some which have come to pass and some proving that Bible prophecy is true. But we also see that there are some that are yet to be fulfilled. But what does this mean to you and me? Jesus tells us himself in Luke chapter 12 that you also must be ready. For the Son of Man is coming in an hour that you do not expect. So Jesus tells us that we must be ready. But how can we be ready? In Mark 16 we read, "Whoever believes and is baptized will be saved, but whoever does not believe will be condemned." So this, my friends, is how we can prepare. Through the belief of the reliability of the prophecies that are given to us in the Bible, we should take this one step further and understand and be ready for the remaining prophecies. And the most significant one of those is the return of Jesus. And I thank you for listening. Keep reading the Bible, as it's the only way to know the truth about what is to come. And I leave you with just one final verse from John 14. "And now I have told you before it came to pass, that when it is come to pass, you might believe." Thank you.